Hello everybody and welcome to a joyful clay tutor. My name is Tressa. And today in this video I'm going to be comparing what the difference is between Crayola Air-Dry Clay and polymer clay. And in this instance I'm using Fimo. In this video I will talk about 6 different between the two of these clays. So please stick around to the end and like my video and subscribe if you want. Okay, so let's get started. So tip number one. Crayola Air-Dry Clay is a self-hardening clay. It dries within 72 hours. It takes 72 hours. Once you make your piece, it's going to take this clay 72 hours for this to dry. Versus Fimo clay or polymer clay, which you bake it according to manufacturer guidelines, and within 20 minutes or an hour your piece is dried and ready to go. So tip number 2, Crayola Air-Dry Clay starts to dry out as you work with it, and you need to keep water handy at your table because it will dry out. It's starting to dry out and crack a little bit, so you take a drop of water and you smooth it out. So as you're working with this clay, it will dry out. Versus polymer clay, which does not dry out. It does not dry out at all. It stays flexible, and you can continue to work with it, walk away, and come back, and this clay does not dry out versus Crayola Air-Dry Clay, which dries out. Tip number 3, the workability. Crayola Air-Dry Clay, when you take it out of the package, is ready to use. It's ready to use. All you have to do is just, start working with your project, whatever project you're going to make. So it's ready to use right out of the package versus polymer clay, which has to be conditioned. You have to chop it up into little pieces, and you have to work with it in your hands, and you have to warm it up. It takes time to condition polymer clay. So, tip number 4, or the difference between Crayola Air-Dry Clay and polymer clay. I'm going to give you a demonstration about the difference between the durability of Crayola Air-Dry Clay and baked polymer clay. So I used a number 1, a number 5, and a number 7 on the pasta machine. And the number 1 is like real paper thin. And number 5 is a couple of cards thick, playing cards. Number 7 is, double that. And then what I did was I took the number 7 and I folded it in half, and I created a piece that's 1/8 of an inch. And then I created a piece that is about the size of my finger. So I'm going to compare the durability of Crayola Air-Dry Clay and the durability of polymer clay. Now I did the number 1 on the pasta machine, and I cracked it in my hand, and it just crumbles. It just crumbles. So that's that was a number 1. Versus the Fimo clay, after you bake it, the number 1 paper thin is flexible. The number 5 on the pasta machine, which is a couple of cards thick, when you go to crack it in between your fingers, all you just apply a little bit of pressure, and it just, cracks. Versus the polymer clay, which remains flexible after you bake it, and it does not crack. Now, I make miniatures all the time, and so I use a number 5 or a number 7. This is a number 7 on the, with the pasta machine. This is the air-dry Crayola clay. You crack it, and it just, again, it just crumbles. Versus, my polymer clay, which, is starting to get real stiff. And it did crack a little bit, on the back, because, as it gets stiffer, it's going to, crack a little bit. And I make miniatures all the time, and here's what's the difference between, the arms on this little critter and the arms on this little critter. This is the, Crayola versus the polymer. This is the polymer, the Crayola Air-Dry Clay. It's going to crack. So, the little arm, little legs, will crack off. Versus the polymer clay, excuse me, which does not crack. So if I go to pinch this little guy, he's not going to crack. It might crack, if you're pulling on it. So tip number, the number 14, which is 1/8 of an inch. When you crack it, it's, again, it will crack. Versus, the polymer clay, which does not crack at size 14. This is 1/8 of an inch. And finally, the one that's 1/4 of an inch, this clay, once it's dried, it's not going to crack. You have to really, really push on it in order to, make it crack. And I'm not going to do that. On the 1/8 of an inch here, 1/4 of an inch, I put a toothpick in this little section right here, so it would not crack off. So, the durability is, polymer clay is much more flexible versus the Crayola Air-Dry Clay, which tends to crumble until it's a finger thick. So my recommendation is make it at least a finger thick. So, tip number 5 is Crayola Air-Dry Clay is not waterproof. Crayola Air-Dry Clay is like the Wicked Witch of the West on The Wizard of Oz, where she's afraid of water. Crayola Air-Dry Clay, after it has been dried, you put it in water and it's going to melt. I'm melting. So you cannot use it outside, because it will melt. Versus polymer clay, which is waterproof and it can go outside. It is a little porous, but it can go outside. You can, here's what it looks like on the inside. It can go outside. Okay, so tip number 6. This clay, Crayola Air-Dry Clay, is a very messy clay to work with. It's an earth clay. It's like pottery clay, so it's an earth clay. And it's messy. It's going to make your hands messy. It's going to make your tools messy. It's going to make your pasta machine messy. And it is going to make your table messy. So that is one of the things about this clay. Versus the polymer clay, which, does not get all over your hands. Some of the red will come off on here, but, it's not a messy clay. You still have cleanup, but it's not messy like just Crayola Air-Dry Clay. Well, I hope you enjoy this video and give me a thumbs up and like my video, because I like to be liked, and subscribe to my channel. And in the next video, I will be comparing Crayola Air-Dry Clay to Crayola Model Magic Clay, and I'm going to be producing videos like this and giving tips and tricks about how to work with air-dry clay and polymer clay. Thank you.